Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine in Cleveland, Ohio. This is the All Access Med School Admissions Podcast. Hello again, everybody. I'm your host, Christian Essman, and welcome to episode number 20. I really can't believe that I have 20 podcast episodes, and I have you to thank. I have all my previous guests to thank for making this project possible, and you keep giving me your time to consume this information, and you keep coming back for more. So thank you so much. I'm bringing you a bonus episode today where you're just going to get me, and I'm calling this one the Holiday Homework episode. At the time that I'm recording this, it's early December 2019, and the holiday break is quickly approaching. So, you know what? I've got some special tips for you, some things to think about and work on over the upcoming holiday break if you're getting ready to apply next spring. Before we get to the real meat of the topics that I want to share with you today, I want to bring a great AAMC-sponsored event to your attention. On Thursday, February 22nd, 2020, the AAMC will be hosting their annual virtual med school fair. This is a really convenient way to learn about more med schools that are out there. And best of all, it's totally free, man. Last year, there were over 70 med schools that did this thing, and over 10,000 pre-meds participated throughout the day. So as a participant, you're able to go to this virtual med school booths. I'm using air quotes. And then you can chat with med school reps, and they have this really cool chat box feature. So you can interact with the med school reps and ask them questions, and then you can go and visit other med school booths. And then throughout the day, the AAMC has these virtual plenary presentations that are put on by med school deans and directors that give talks on different admissions related topics. So it's kind of cool. You can pop in and out of these plenary sessions while you're in the med school fair. So the AAMC doesn't have their site updated just yet with the 2020 virtual med school fair details, but I just wanted to get this out and on your radar. And as we get more information about it, I will make you aware of it in future episodes. All right. Speaking of calendars, at the time I'm recording this, again, it's December 2019. The holidays are around the corner, and many of you may find yourself at home relaxing, maybe with a little extra time on your hands. Well, if you're planning on applying next summer, then I have some homework for you and some things to take care of and think about over winter break. So, what can you start to work on? Number one, I think the first thing you can start to work on is starting to do some research on the medical schools to which you think you want to apply. You can start this, by checking out what their prerequisites are. Do they have something special that you might need to have in order to apply to them? Listen, you don't want to be surprised next spring when you realize that you totally missed something and now you can't apply to them. So, speaking of prerequisites, in particular courses, remember, these usually don't have to be completed by the time you're submitting your application. Prerequisite courses usually have to be done by the time you would presumably matriculate at that school. Oftentimes, we can see in AMCAS that someone's scheduled to take a particular course in an upcoming semester. So we can kind of see that they haven't completed it yet, but they're planning on taking it in a future semester. But all that said, though, it is in your very best interest to have as many prerequisite courses completed as possible at the time of application and on your transcript, because this is how medical schools are going to benchmark and evaluate you. So if you don't have a whole lot of them completed, we're not going to be able to see the course, how you performed in them. So that's something, a tip to keep in mind. Okay, back to researching medical schools. I kind of went on a tangent there. As a point of reference, the average number of medical schools that applicants typically apply to is about 15 to 16. So over winter break, might be a time that you might want to start composing your list of medical schools. And maybe you start with a large list. And then as you're doing your research, start to whittle it down to the schools you feel would be just right for you. So where can you start to do this research about schools? Well, if you've listened to my other episodes, I'm a big fan of the AAMC's MSAR. That's the admissions requirement, the medical school admissions requirement. So MSAR, that's what that stands for. And so you can sign up for that online. Just so you know, right now, medical school admissions offices are working on updating our MSARs for the next cycle. So the newest version won't be available here for a couple months. But what you'll see currently is at least an opportunity to get you familiar with how schools are structured and the curricula and things like that. Of course, the other place that you can research are obviously medical schools' websites. And if you're looking at their prerequisites, another caveat is that some schools may not have updated their sites just yet for the next cycle. So I think you can still get a good feel for the school, but just know you may have to come back and revisit their prerequisite site maybe after the first of the year or later part of the winter, because that's when schools maybe start to update their prerequisites for the next cycle, 2020 to 2021. Another thing I think you can do over break is to start to talk with family members about your plans to apply to medical school this coming spring, particularly from a financial perspective. Listen, it is not an inexpensive process to apply to medical schools. Not only do you need to be academically and emotionally prepared for this application process, you really need to be financially prepared. This isn't a process where you just want to go throw your name in the hat and just see how it goes, because the investment is just too great. So if you think financing the application process is going to be tough on your own, then take the opportunity maybe over the holidays to start talking to family members. Let them know your plans. See if they might be willing to help you out a little bit financially. Maybe somebody will float you a small loan if necessary. So put it out there to some family members and see if you can get them to bite. I've put a link to an AAMC site in the show notes that goes over the cost of applying to medical school. But just doing some quick cowboy math for a primary application alone to, let's say, 16 med schools, you're looking at $770. Then you have to factor in the secondary application fees that can range anywhere from about $25 to over $100. Now we're definitely looking at over $1,000 just to apply to medical school. And we haven't even factored in any of the other fees like the MCAT test or maybe test prep materials. And then the other miscellaneous fees that can come along with this, with like sending your transcripts to AMCAS. Sometimes you have to pay a fee to send transcripts. So definitely something to keep in mind. So speaking of finances, if you're currently in the application cycle now and you've been accepted to medical school, well, first of all, congratulations. You totally did it. And second of all, the holiday break is a great time to get to work on your FAFSA application for financial aid. Now, you might be thinking that filling out FAFSA doesn't sound like a great time. But then let me just say that I guess you could consider a convenient time to maybe work on your FAFSA application, since you'll need parental tax documentation from 2018 that might be easier to get while you're maybe back at home visiting over the holidays. Also, if you're accepted, I was on an AMCAS webinar just the other day, and they're going to begin emailing you information about the Choose Your Medical School tools that will become available in your AMCAS application as an accepted student on February 19th. This is really important stuff. So please read those emails you get from the AAMC and from the medical schools or schools to which you're accepted about these Choose Your Medical Schools tool, because this is really important stuff. So just a heads up there. Okay. Back to those people that are planning on applying next spring. I have one more piece of homework for you. Winter break is also a good time to start to pull together ideas, drafts, things that you will want to put into your personal statement. The personal statement is going to require several drafts, and now is the time to start to think about it, when you might have a little bit of downtime and you're just relaxing. So I'm going to spend kind of the rest of this episode talking to you about the personal statement. If you've listened to previous episodes of my podcast, you know that I had a conversation about personal statements with Mr. Paul White from Johns Hopkins. That was back in episode 6. So I'm going to bring you a short encore of that portion of our conversation where we talked about personal statement tips, and it's a little over 15 minutes. And then I'm going to come back and give you my tips on personal statements. So here's that little short snippet of Paul and I talking about personal statements. The medical school, Paul, or do you want to switch over and talk about personal statement things?
Oh, let's switch over and talk about personal statements.
All right. So we're not doing listener questions today. Paul and I talked, and we want to dispel some of the myths and things about personal statements. And I know this causes a lot of angst among some applicants, and I think it's because it can be difficult to write. But it's one part of a really large application, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And again, it gets back to holistic.
Yeah.
I mean, you can write the best application in the world, but if the rest of your applications, best personal statement in the world, but if the rest of your application stinks, you just have a good essay.
Yeah. Let me read the prompt. I printed out the prompt here before we got on this call. Okay, so this is directly from AMCAS. So I thought it'd be important just to give context to anybody who's listening to this has not applied before. This is what the personal statement prompt is in the application. The directions say, use the personal comments essay as an opportunity to distinguish yourself from other applicants. Consider and write your personal comments essay carefully. Many admissions committees place significant weight on the essay. Here are some questions you may want to consider while writing the essay. 1, why have you selected the field of medicine? That's an important one. 2, what motivates you to learn more about medicine? 3, what do you want medical schools to know about you that hasn't been disclosed in other sections of the application? And then there's additional ones. In addition, you may want to include information such as unique hardships, challenges, or obstacles that may have influenced your educational pursuits, or comments on significant fluctuations in your academic record that are not explained elsewhere in your application. So
I'll start with that last one first.
Yeah.
I leave that out. Okay.
Yeah.
You know why? Because that's something you can discuss if you get to the interview.
Right.
But you don't want to draw too much attention to that. We're going to see it anyway.
Yeah, I don't think you need to. And sometimes students misperceive what they feel grade fluctuation is like. They got a B+ in organic chemistry.
That's right.
I got to spend a paragraph talking about that in my personal statement.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, Christian, I was recently at a fair. I don't do many fairs, but they asked me to come early because they give the attendees the opportunity to meet with their students. This is at the University of Maryland College Park, where Wendy Laughlin is the director of college counseling, and is just one of the great ones, and has a terrific staff as well. But one of the, last year I did the interview session with, and they're one-on-one. So, and I that was actually interesting. This year, I instead of an interview, mock interview, this year I wanted to do the personal statement, and I enjoyed it because the young man wrote just wonderfully well and clear and to the point. But what he lacked was addressing that very first question: what brings you to medicine? I didn't get to that until well into the second page. Now, keep in mind, this was double spaced, and not the way one would have it on the AMCAS application. But what I told him was, if it took him that long to talk about why medicine, you're going to lose your screener, your reviewer.
Yeah.
I'm looking for why medicine first and foremost. I'm looking for what his experience, her experience has been up to this point that makes them feel that, they've got to go into medicine. This is how, they enjoy working with people. They've enjoyed what they've observed, done, that's medically related, but I've got to find that somewhere. I didn't see that anywhere. And I shared this with the young man, and he thought about it. He said, "You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right."
Yeah.
And I said, if we don't get that, if you don't hook us, so to speak, in the first few minutes or first paragraph of your personal statement, you risk us not wanting to read any further. Meaning, I literally have read a couple 100,000 applications.
Yeah, you have.
Over the long time I've been doing not just medical school admissions, but undergrad as well, and also for ETS, for National Merit, for all these different scholarship services that I serve on. And I want to get a sense of why from whatever the question is, in the first few paragraphs, first few sentences of the paragraph. I don't want to have to dig too deep and realize I'm still not getting why this person wants to be a doctor. If I have to do that, then I may elect to move on.
Yeah, it's got to be easy. And this sounds, I'm putting up air quotes. It has to be easy to read.
It is for me by now. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it has to, because we're reading literally thousands of these during the day, at night, in the airport, on the couch, at the desk, and trying to get them through them as thoughtfully and efficiently as we can. And I mean, I maybe you could disagree with this, but when somebody doesn't know where to start, I'll say, maybe start with like 2 or 3 themes that describe how you've been influenced to go into medicine.
That's right. No, I think that's a great way to approach it.
Just to kind of give you a place to start. And then as you draft and redraft, maybe you can meld into something else. But,
and the other thing though, and it's not just a personal statement, it's the entire application. Sometimes people don't know where to start and what to write. Write what you know, and not what you think we are looking for.
Do you think, I hear this often, that students will come in and say, will you read my personal statement? I say, oh, okay, I'll take a look. And then so I know I was told I have to have a catchy first sentence. And so I think sometimes people take that over the top a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think students need to have, like you said, a hook earlier? Do you think they need to have a catchy first few sentences to hook you in, or is it just?
When I say hook, it has to be something of interest that shows me, hey, this person sort of knows what they're talking about. If they're all over the map, and they're talking about how they been a member of the football team, or she was on the staff of the newspaper, and everyone said, well, what do you want to be? And I realized I'm good with people. What does that have to do with patients though? Yeah.
Medicine. Yep. I've said to people, and don't get too abstract. Or just give us like these abstract thoughts. You need to back it up with some citations. If you're going to say physicians have to be the best communicators because they have to do blah, 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 then what have you done to hone your communication skills that was through one of your experiences in working with a population in your community where you had to learn you're giving outreach information to medical information to people, discharge instructions and stuff like that. I mean, cite examples.
Right. I think, I think one thing that surprises people, at least for us, we require two of your humanities, social and/or behavioral sciences to have been writing intensive. Well, why is that? Because we want to know that you can communicate. We want to know, and that's not just written communication, but also verbal communication. We want to know that you can be concise. Yeah. What you said this right up when we said that we're going to talk about personal statements. You said, a great personal statement doesn't necessarily get you like the interview. I mean, you have to have. That's right. So it can be a Pulitzer Prize winning personal statement and bring you to tears, but it doesn't guarantee an interview, right? But that's right. It doesn't. But poorly written. It just means you're a good writer. Yeah. Maybe. People always ask us, you probably get this too. Is there a personal statement that you'll always remember? It's funny because there's one in particular from undergrad that I remember that literally had to be about from my earliest career in undergrad admissions, and I won't go into that. From the medical school side, we're not looking for doom and gloom necessarily, but when someone does talk about their own experience and why medicine, they're revealing themselves. And I've seen some of the most, without going into any exact quotes or anything, I've seen people talk about things that have affected them, and yet they're able to go beyond themselves. Someone who, for instance, who realizes no matter how hard his life or her life has been, there's still of greater they've had more advantages than some others. The fact that they've been able to go to college, the fact that they're applying to medical school, and how they want to turn that around. So I guess there are certain themes that I think have resonated with me, and maybe that says something more about me. I don't know. Yeah.
How do you know when you like a personal statement? Like, when you read it and you kind of, I like that. Like, what is there a feeling like, what makes you feel like that?
That's a great question. There are times when I've read a personal statement and I'm like, oh, I want to meet this person.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not always a smile. It's just that, wow, I want to meet this person. There's someone who can think like this, and not everyone can, but there are times when I just say, this is someone I want to talk to. I want to have a conversation with. Yeah.
And I think what you're saying, and I think what you're saying, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they somehow have captured their writing voice.
Yes, there you go.
You feel like they're talking
their writing voice. They've captured their personality.
Yes. Yeah. And that's hard to do.
It is. It's very hard to do. But see, here's the other thing, though. Sometimes that personal statement and what that voice is captured by their letter writers. Or cited by their letter writers. And they'll say, this is X, Y, Z. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly how they came through in their essay. And that's when you say, all right, this is someone we've got to interview. And then the interviewer says, wow, I wasn't expecting them, because, you have a lot of opportunity to write and rewrite those personal statements. Yeah, they come in, and that's exactly who they are.
Yeah. I think this is a good piece of advice then to people, maybe, is that when you're drafting this, you don't want to, give it to 25 or 50 people to edit and review, but you have a select group of people you want to give it to and say, what do you does this sound like me?
Oh, yeah, does this is probably the most important thing. Does this sound like me?
Yeah. Do you understand what I'm trying to express? Do you feel the fire in my belly that I want to go into medicine? And that might be a clue. Hopefully people are being honest with you, because sometimes if you give it to your parents, they might say, oh, this is great, but they don't want to say.
No, I wouldn't give it to my parents necessarily, but I would to a very close friend who because, sometimes we're completely ourselves around our friends in ways that we aren't around our family. I mean, not to say you're not yourself, or hopefully you are with your family. It's just that your friends have a different dynamic with you.
Something you mentioned a couple minutes ago is that you're often you appreciate somebody's telling their life story that have overcome some challenges and appreciation of the. And I think one thing to point out is not everybody has those hardships or those challenges.
No, that's right.
But if you do write about something that's kind of could potentially be emotional, you got to know that that's fair game to talk about in an interview.
Oh, for sure.
You don't have to bare your soul to us.
No.
Because that topic could come up in the interview. And if it's sensitive and you feel like you might have it, I've had some people sometimes, get a little emotional and
we had an interviewer at my former institution who asked a young man what brought him to medicine. And the young man started to describe a situation, an illness by one of the parents, and then just broke down into tears, put his head on the desk of the interviewer. And then the interviewer looked at his personal statement again, and then looked at another part of the application and said, but your parent is still alive. I think it's yes, but it really hurt my family and just caused disruption. Well, this person clearly wasn't at the point where they could talk to a patient in year one about something,
Yeah. Well, I think that's a perfect example of you're in an interview situation. You're already going to be you're going to be nervous.
Right.
And then this sensitive topic could come up and you're not kind of prepared yet to kind of talk about it in a way that feels comfortable. And then the next thing you know, you've started to get emotional, which is fine. That happens. But I mean,
oh, sure, it does.
But it's not the situation you probably planned for.
Right. So, and you don't want to be embarrassed by something in the interview.
Yep.
or in their personal statement.
Yeah.
You know, if you find it embarrassing to write about, then I may find it embarrassing to read. So leave it out of there.
Yeah, TMI sometimes.
That's right.
I think that
and I have seen things that I thought, I wish you hadn't.
Yep, I think that's where, when I was asking about, like, do you need a fancy schmancy hook to bring people in? And that's where
not like that.
Over the top, and they get TMI, and
you don't need something to. You don't want to. I mean, the idea that you have to shock your reader is just that's fine for fiction, but you don't need that for
right. Yeah, this is not a novel, and
this is not a novel. That's right.
Sometimes we're reading these while I'm eating lunch, and I don't need to read about green pus coming out, and like, I get it. Like, you're in an ER and you saw an abscess, but I don't need to read the gory details about it.
Right. I'd rather not. Yeah.
What other kind of tips when you're giving a talk about personal statements? Are there things that you like people to kind of keep in mind?
I want to make sure there's a conclusion, frankly.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get to the bottom of it and think, okay, I was expecting something else. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So tie it up. Wrap it up.
Right. Tie it together.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, that's one of the reasons why we want them to have had a writing intensive courses where they'll learn, hopefully, to be a writer and to work on their writing skills. Because if they're not able to communicate in writing, that's not the death knell of their application, but we may pass on to someone who can write. Because when you get to medical school, particularly on rounds, you're going to have to write concisely.
Mm-hmm.
And convincingly and explain. And that's one reason why we have our scholarly concentration. You have to have a written presentation at the end of the year for that.
Yeah. And I think when you said you have to be a good writer, and sometimes I feel that some students, they are compensating because they think they don't think they're a good enough writer or strong enough writer, and then they start writing with a thesaurus by their side.
No, don't do that. Right.
And so sometimes, I mean, I think I have a decent vocabulary. Certainly, Dr. Maida has. She's the grammar queen.
She is. I know
she has to. There's been times where she's like, I got to look this word up.
Right.
Like, if we have to look it up, and if those words are not in your general day-to-day vernacular,
right,
you probably shouldn't be using them.
I agree. I mean, I don't have the time to stop to look it up.
So sometimes, I mean, we'll if everything seems to be fine with the applicant, we'll bring them in for an interview, but maybe make a note to the interviewer. Do they talk like they wrote?
Right.
Are they using words like that from their personal statement and how they're speaking with you in the interview? And if not, if they're saying like every other like word in their interview, then you know that maybe their personal statement was a little bit over groomed.
Right.
I agree. Yeah. Any final thoughts, Paul, before we wrap things up?
About the personal statement? No, I think you pretty much said it, which is, write in your own voice, be comfortable and knowledgeable about what it is you've written.
Okay, so that's called a sting, an audio sting, and I found a new one. It's a little heavy, but I thought I'd try it out for this episode because I like hard rock music. Anyway, okay, so I wanted to play that clip of Paul and I having a conversation about personal statements to plant a few seeds about some of the tips I'm going to give you in just a moment. And I also wanted to make sure that you heard the prompt again, because I think that really sets the stage for things. So I think one thing to talk about is, what is the purpose of the personal statement? Well, I think the goal of the personal statement is to compose a thoughtful, well-organized essay that provides insight about you and your aspirations for an education and career in medicine. This is an essay that is concise, cogent, coherent, and grammatically correct, that reveals you and your personality. Now, why is it important? Why is the personal statement important, and why does it cause so much angst for people? Well, it's important because it's one of the few parts of the application over which you have some control, because it's not based on test scores or other perceptions, people's perceptions of you. It's a place where you can make a case for your candidacy and oftentimes connect the dots for medical schools. You've heard me say connect the dots before in your life's journey or your story and how you arrived at this point. And finally, it's a place where you can provide some personality to your application, which can sometimes be difficult in the AMCAS application. So that's why it's important. Why it's not the most important, I think we need to talk about that. Well, it's not the most important part of the application because it's just one component of a very large application. And I'm sorry to tell you, but the best essay in air quotes doesn't guarantee you an interview or an acceptance. But it is the place where you can start to tell your story. And if you want to think of the experiences section of the application as a place to share with people what your interest in medicine has been and what you've participated in that's led you to this point, then think of the personal statement as a part of the application where you tell people why you're interested in medicine and what's led you to this and why this has led you to this point. So the personal statement should be reflective. You should evaluate and reflect on the events in your life that have led you to the point of applying to medical school. Think about, what would you like admissions committees to know about you? Have you educated yourself on the pros and cons of a career in medicine? So how do you do this reflection stuff? Well, you need to evaluate your life story, yourself, and your motivations. Think of things like this. What do you think makes you special or different? Have you considered the details of your life history? Have you had some hardships or personal or some family problems? Who are the influential people in your life? How have you learned about medicine? What motivates you for a career in medicine? What are some of your passions? What about your work history? Have there been some significant activities that have shaped you? How have you grown and changed from these activities? What qualities do you think are important in doctoring? And finally, can you cite examples of acts of service or compassion or empathy or sacrifice or integrity? So this is some stuff to kind of keep in mind when we're talking about reflecting. So you need to do this exercise prior to sitting down and drafting. The other thing you heard me mention in my conversation with Paul was I mentioned something about finding your writing voice. And if you think about it, all of our voices are different. We have different tone, we have different pitch. Our voices sometimes have different tempo or style or articulation. So sometimes our voices have different volumes. Everybody's voice is different. Your writing will be too. Nobody has the same type of writing style or writing voice. So how do you find this writing voice? It's a real thing. Like, go Google it. You'll see a lot of articles come up about finding your writing voice. So I think you need to think about who you are. Talk to people. And this is where doing this over a holiday break can be helpful. People that know you well. Ask them, how do I speak? How do I sound when I speak? And also another exercise is read your work out loud. Does it sound like you? And when you're writing this personal statement, consider to whom you're writing. This is not to a friend or a parent where it's kind of maybe too informal. It's not to a scientific journal, which some people might say are kind of dry. And it's not a short story that gets maybe sometimes too dramatic. The bottom line is, this isn't easy. It's going to take a few drafts. But if you can capture your writing voice, it can help you convey your message, and hopefully the reader will enjoy it. That's when I think people remember personal statements. It's when they enjoy what they're reading. That's what they will remember. So, remember a few years ago, there were some commercials, some beer commercials where they would say, "To the pit of misery, dilly dilly." I've kind of felt that you want to avoid the pit of misery when you're doing personal statement writing. And what do I mean by that? These are some pitfalls. Keep in mind that your personal statement is going to be sent to all the medical schools to which you've selected. So you don't want to write in your personal statements something to the effect of, "And this is why I want to attend the Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine." I would find that flattering because I work at Case Western. But just know you just sent this to the 15 other medical schools you're applying to, and they're going to see that too. How do you think they're going to feel? So your personal statement doesn't need to be directed to one particular medical school. You don't need to put that in there. The other pit of misery is if you plagiarize and people find out about it, bad things will happen. If you misrepresent yourself, that is not good either. It can prompt an investigation by the AAMC or an AMCAS investigation if you're not representing yourself truthfully. And that can have poor implications on your application. The other pit of misery is that you need to know that once you submit your application to AMCAS, it's set basically in stone. If you then go back, you click submit, and then you go back and see that you made some grammatical errors or punctuation errors or typos in your personal statement, you cannot fix it. Med schools cannot fix this. I've had applicants contact our office and say, oops, I saw this big typo in my personal statement. Can you fix it on your end? On our end, we just see what AMCAS basically shows us the data. So we can't manipulate anything in AMCAS. So those are my kind of top three pits of misery that you want to avoid. Now, when it comes in that prompt, it says you may want to consider some special situations to talk about. And so special situation could be something like some academic blemishes. Like what if you have a bad semester and or a bad year? Well, I think this is a place you might want to give a nod to it. But then move on. Don't ask medical schools to don't count that semester, don't count that year, discredit them. Just give a nod to what the situation was and then move on. Focus on what you have done since then. How have you changed and improved since that situation occurred? The other special situation might be, what if you're reapplying to medical school? There's probably some different schools of thought out there that you should mention it or shouldn't mention it, but I think invariably medical schools are going to figure it out if you don't overtly tell them that you're reapplying to medical school. But this is an opportunity for you to say, yeah, I'm applying to medical school again, and I've taken some time to reevaluate things, and this is how I've improved my application, how I've grown since my previous application. So there's something to consider there. And what about life challenges? Now, this is something Paul and I talked about a little bit near the end of our conversation. And when we're talking about things that could be emotional, life challenges can be worth stating, I would say, to provide some context to your life or your journey. But again, as Paul and I were saying, don't write about things you're not comfortable discussing in person. You don't have to bear everything in your life to medical schools, but if you think that you could be comfortable discussing it with somebody in person and it adds that context to your life or journey, then put it in there. But it should somehow relate back then to your interest in going into medicine. Okay, people always ask me, what are the things that I should avoid in personal statements? And so I've listed out 10 of them here that I want to share with you. So coming in at number 10, overly dramatic essays. This is not a novel, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. It's not a novel. It's not a short story. Don't get too overly dramatic. It can come across as a little bit disingenuous and kind of over the top. Number 9, bragging. You do not need to tell us how smart you are, how talented you are, how accomplished you are, just how amazing you are. You need to show a little bit of humility. We'll see your grades, we'll see your academics and your MCAT score, and if they're off the charts, we're pretty good at picking up on that kind of stuff. You don't need to tell us how smart you are. I'll tell you what, it doesn't go over well. Number 8, overusing the letter I. What I mean by that is, starting every sentence with the letter I. It becomes repetitive and it's poor sentence structure, and ultimately it's kind of boring to read. If every one of your sentences starts with I believe, I know, I am, it really shows poor structure to your personal statement. So go back and check those sentences for too many I statements. Number 7, overly complicated writing. Just be direct. Some people really get into the weeds in the way they write, and it's hard to kind of figure out what they're saying because they just get too complicated. And you want to be direct. Again, we're reading thousands of these applications. You want them to be kind of quote unquote easy to read and not get overly complicated with the topics that you're kind of bringing up and going all over the place. Which gets to number 6, too tangential, too many topics. If you start getting tangential and you're introducing too many topics in your personal statement, it starts to lose focus. It can make it difficult to read. Again, you want this to be a flowing personal statement that's kind of easy for medical school admissions people to read these and get through it and keep evaluating the rest of your application. Number 5, reiterating all of your experiences and extracurricular activities. Your personal statement should not be a narrative of all your experiences that you've done since you were born, or you're in high school, or you're in college. We will see in your experiences section all the activities that you've been doing outside of the classroom or sometimes in the classroom. You don't need to reiterate that for us in a narrative in your personal statement. And again, it will be a boring read. Number 4, spelling, punctuation, and grammatical errors. This goes back to the pit of misery. Once you submit, you cannot change anything in your personal statement. So double, triple, quadruple check your personal statement for those type of errors. Number 3, unsuccessful attempts to being too clever or flippant. It can come across as sounding a little cynical. This is not a place. Now, I think a lot of admissions people have a pretty good sense of humor, but you always don't know who your audience is. And the personal statement is not the place to start to try out your new comedy routine. I've read some really good personal statements that have a little bit of levity and a little bit of humor in it, and that kind of brings out that personality that we talked about. But if I've read some poor ones too, where it doesn't go over well. So you got to be really careful there. Number 2, as mentioned in my conversation with Paul, writing with a thesaurus at your side. Too many words that are about, 6 inches long, and those are not words that you usually use in your general day-to-day conversations with people. I would avoid those types of words. And my number 1 thing to avoid, and I cannot believe I have to tell people this, but do not use profanity in your personal statement. Every year, I swear we read some personal statements, a small percentage of them, but still, it's enough that it makes you remember it. People will use bad words in their personal statements. I think they use it sometimes to try to get our attention. And it gets our attention all right, but not in the way that you would like. So stay away from the profanity. This is too high stakes to try to use that as your hook to get people in, because again, it doesn't come across well. All right. My pro tips for the personal statement comes to formatting. Med schools receive your essay as a plain text, so you can't use bullet points in it. You can't indent paragraphs or do bold or italics fonts. It's very plain text. So when you're writing this, you may want to include an extra space between paragraphs since indentation is not permitted. And there's a set, when you're going through the AMCAS application, they give you instructions on how to upload your personal statement. And if you don't follow their instructions and just use, let's say, a Word document and you copy it and cut it and paste it into AMCAS, all those paragraphs that you had that kept things flowing well now turn out to be one big chunk of text. And you might think, well, what's the big deal? Well, again, when you're reading thousands of these day and night, you want that to be an easy read. And sometimes when you just see a big chunk of text, you lose the flow of the personal statement and you start to zone out. So follow their instructions very closely. So you can use something like Microsoft Notepad or Mac like Text Edit. Just know that once you also put your personal statement into the AMCAS application, you cannot run a spell check or grammar check in the AMCAS application. So do all that stuff beforehand. So you might want to maybe start drafting it like in Google Docs or Microsoft or something like that. Get it all the way you like it, then put it into Notepad and then do the formatting there and then copy it and stick it into AMCAS application. But again, follow their instructions very closely. So just to kind of wrap up my thoughts on the personal statement, a few things here. This is a long process. It would take you longer than a day to write. So that's why I'm trying to giving you this prompt now, things to think about as you come up to the holidays when you might have a little bit of time to step away and recharge your batteries and start to think about this project coming up. When you start to write, do some writing, rewrite it, don't be afraid to walk away and then come back and seek some advice on this. And then if you seek advice, listen to the feedback. Don't discredit it. And if you have at your university or college have a writing center, take it to them. Kind of go get their feedback too. Utilize your resources. Ultimately, when you do start seeking advice and using writing centers and things like that, you still want to make sure that this is your original work. And then as you're doing your writing, don't be afraid if you think you need to start over. I know you're going to start to put a lot of time and effort into this. And if it's just not going the way that you had hoped, don't be afraid to start over and do a different draft. And ultimately, you need to be thinking, will the application match the person at the interview? So when somebody's reading this, ask them, does this sound like me? Does this sound like the person you would meet if you were expecting to meet me? So those are my tips on the personal statement. I hope you find them helpful. If you have any questions, you can always email me your admissions-related questions at allaccess@case.edu. And I've told you before, I'm working on an episode with all listener questions. We're trying to get that squared away, but with the holidays, people's schedules are pretty tight, but I'm working on that. So send me your questions. I'll also respond to you and let you know that I got it, and we'll see if we can help you out. Hey, that's it for now. We'll see you next time.